I used to think Thanksgiving meant going home. Even if that home hasn't really been yours for a long time. That year, David insisted on picking me up from the assisted living center himself. He said Ben was off school and really missed Grandma. "It's good to see you a little early," he added. I had packed my things well ahead of time. A wash-thin cardigan, 2 jars of homemade peach jam, and a little turkey ornament I'd stitched together from fabric scraps.
Which city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And hey, make sure you watch till the end. Something's going to happen that you won't see coming.
When the door opened, Jenna greeted me with a smile that was just enough. "The guest room's ready. You'll just be here for a couple of nights." I nodded and stepped inside. The house smelled like cinnamon candles and floor cleaner. Ben ran up and hugged me. "Grandma." In that moment his hug did feel warm. On the table sat a steaming turkey and 3 kinds of pie, all arranged like a magazine spread. I helped Ben cut his meat and listened to his silly jokes. David chatted about the city's new infrastructure plans, and Jenna corrected his word choices now and then. Everything looked picture perfect until Ben asked, "Grandma, when are you leaving?" "Tomorrow." He said it so casually, like asking where I was headed on my next vacation. Jenna kept slicing potatoes. We only cleared the guest room for 2 nights. My fork froze midair. David cleared his throat but didn't say anything. He just reached for his wine glass. Jenna turned to him and said, "David, you really should have confirmed the dates with me. I only found out yesterday you invited Margaret over. You know how tight the schedule gets before the holidays." She said it in the same tone one might use to book a conference room. I looked down at my plate, my appetite evaporating. "Okay," David finally said, his voice a little stiff. "I'll take you back after lunch tomorrow. Traffic should be light." I nodded. Said nothing. After dinner I automatically stood up to clear the dishes. No one stopped me. No one offered to help. The cabinets were higher than I remembered. I had to stand on my toes to put the plates away. Moonlight filtered in through the kitchen window, cold on the backs of my hands. The scent of dish soap mixed with roasted squash. It smelled like leftovers from a life I used to live, familiar but with an ache I couldn't quite place. From the living room I heard Jenna wiping down the coffee table, saying, "I reorganized the kitchen storage again while she was here this time." David responded with a non-committal grunt, not even bothering to fake interest. I stood there in the kitchen listening to them talk about me like I was a suitcase, something to be stored, scheduled, managed. At some point Jenna walked in and set a neatly sealed container by the sink. "Take this with you. It's low sodium." Low sodium. Like me, adjusted, muted, safe to have around. I didn't say a word. The kitchen finally went quiet. I sat down looking at my hands. The skin was dry, the knuckles sharp, veins rising like old tree roots. I rubbed them together, still catching a trace of the morning's hand cream. These hands had cradled babies, cooked meals, stitched up every rip in a family's fabric. Now they just held a bag. Headed back to a place that smelled like disinfectant and reheated food. Later Ben came running in with a picture. A handprint flame painted in bright colors. "Grandma, this is for you. You have to put it on your fridge." I kissed his forehead and folded the drawing gently into my bag. I slept lightly that night. Sometime after midnight I went downstairs for a glass of water and caught whispers coming from David and Jenna's bedroom. "Are you really taking her back tomorrow?" It was Jenna. "Yeah." David's voice was low. "I don't think she wants to stay long anyway." "Well, next time, don't spring this kind of last-minute decision on me, okay? Thanksgiving's already stressful enough." I didn't listen any further. I turned on the tap and the cold water felt like it was running straight through my chest. I stood there in the dark kitchen, my hand resting on the edge of the sink, feeling like a stranger in someone else's house. And then it hit me, I was never asked if I wanted to come in the first place. They brought me here not because they needed me, but because this relationship couldn't look too broken. I remembered the night David spent his first sleepover away from home. I sat by the window the whole time waiting. I remembered the day he won his first scholarship. I made 3 copies of the certificate and hung one in every room. I remembered his college graduation when he looked me in the eyes and said, "Mom, I'm gonna move you out of that tiny town one day." Well, I did move out. Only the place he moved me into wasn't a home. It was a facility. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning in slow, steady circles, quiet and merciless just like time. I kept asking myself, why am I even here? Not for reunion. Not to be welcomed. Not to rest. I was here to check off a box. To fulfill a ceremonial obligation. 1 meal. 2 nights. A send-off with low-sodium leftovers. A guest is someone who's expected to leave. Someone who doesn't belong. So the next morning when David came downstairs holding his car keys and a coffee mug, I was already dressed and sitting by the front door. He blinked. "You're not waiting till after lunch?" I smiled, my voice calm. "Didn't you say the schedule's tight before the holiday?" We barely spoke on the ride back. David tuned the radio to the news. Outside, the sky was a dull gray, like looking through frosted glass. Everything blurred, everything distant. The car slowed at the off-ramp and turned down the narrow, familiar road to the facility. My heart sank. Maple Creek Assisted Living wasn't a bad place, if you didn't mind life ticking by like a clock. The front door slid open to that familiar pale yellow hallway and the faint scent of disinfectant clinging to the carpet. Behind the front desk, Doris looked up and smiled gently. "Hi, Mrs. Hall. Back so soon?" Her voice was soft but entirely empty. I forced a small smile and nodded. David didn't linger, just muttered, "I'll call later," and disappeared through the automatic doors. I walked back to my room with my bag in hand. The door still had the Halloween sticker Ben had put up last month. A pumpkin cat in a witch's hat. The room hadn't changed. Beige curtains. The alarm clock on the nightstand had stopped ticking weeks ago. I hadn't bothered replacing the battery. The bed was made spotless, crisp, like no one had ever actually slept in it. It was a space meant for placing someone, not for living. I sat on the edge of the bed, slowly hung up my coat, placed the jar of peach jam deep into the drawer, and gently tucked Ben's turkey painting over it. In that moment, I felt an indescribable ache, like I had carefully folded myself up and tucked myself away where no one would see. The next day I still showed up to the book club in the activity room. We were reading The Kite Runner, though no one really discussed it. We just took turns reading passages aloud. When it was my turn, I read 2 pages flat and even. Then I looked down at the bookmark in my hand. It was one of those printed motivational cards. It said, "Age is just a number." And for a second I wanted to laugh. And cry. I joined the knitting group and started a scarf. Not for the color or pattern, just the motion. Loops and knots, over and over like counting time. Ethel glanced over and said, "You've got a nice tension going there." I nodded. Didn't say anything back. Lunch was the usual. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. A little placard on the table read low-sodium meal. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't just describe the food. It felt like a label for my entire existence now. Mild, bland, easy to manage. Every afternoon at 3:30 they show an old movie in the activity room. That day it was The Wizard of Oz. I sat in the back row watching Dorothy cry, "There's no place like home." And my eyes welled up. Because this place, this home, isn't a home. At night the silence was loud enough to make my ears ring. I'd wake up like I always do, somewhere between 1 and 3, listening to the occasional flutter of a bird's wings outside the window. I'd stare at the ceiling, counting how many insulin shots I had that day, how many aides I'd spoken to, whether anyone had actually called me by my name, not ma'am, but Maggie. Then the next day came. Same schedule. Same routine. Again and again. One afternoon, I noticed a new paper pinned to the wall beside the activity room. In loving memory of Jeanette M., who passed peacefully on Tuesday morning. Jeanette sat diagonally across from me in knitting group. She always used bright yellow yarn. I hadn't come in that day. When she died, her seat stayed empty for a day. By the next, someone new had taken it. No one mentioned her name. It was as if she had never been there. Doris had logged it in the care report. Jeanette's room ready for reassignment. That line was typed neater than any sympathy card could ever be. That night I sat by the window staring into a pitch-black sky. No stars. Not even clouds. The air was so still it felt frozen. I held a mug of reheated milk in my hands and took a sip. Tasted like nothing. And for some reason I laughed. Everything in this place, the meals, the color schemes, the structured activities, the policies, whispered the same message. Your life now should be safe, quiet, obedient. But I don't want to simply ride out the rest of my life. I used to think moving into a care facility meant not being a burden. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized. The real problem here isn't loneliness. It's being treated like you're done living. You become a placeholder. A body waiting near the end. I'm not ungrateful. I know Doris and the others mean well. But deep down more and more I feel it. I don't belong here. Not because it's uncomfortable, but because it's too comfortable. So comfortable it makes you forget how to feel alive. It keeps you from hurting. But it also keeps you from living. That night I unfolded the picture Ben had made, the one with the little flames painted from his chubby fingerprints, and stared at it for a long time. Then I opened the drawer and pulled out my small sewing kit, running my fingers over the scraps of fabric and the familiar curve of the needle. Those scraps were the only shapes I still had control over. That needle, the only thing in this world that still obeyed me. I didn't know what exactly I was going to do. But I knew this much. If I stayed still any longer I'd end up like Jeanette, gone quietly in her sleep, and the next morning, a line on a clipboard would read "Room reassigned." I couldn't wait anymore. No matter how many times I might fall or how ridiculous I might look, I had to take a step. Any step. That whole month I'd felt on edge. I spent my days sewing fabric pouches, one stitch at a time, though my hands trembled more than usual. At night I'd stare out at the inky blue sky and ask myself, if I disappeared would anyone notice? I didn't tell anyone I wanted to leave. I didn't know where I would go. I just knew I couldn't sit in that room forever, waiting for life to finish drawing its final line. And then just as I was teetering between fear and resolve, the phone rang. It was David. "Mom," he said, his voice unusually upbeat. "Ben just finished his winter camp. He's home now and he's been saying he really misses you. Would you want to come visit?" I froze for a second. Then warmth rushed into my chest like sunlight after a long storm. "Of course I'd love to," I said without thinking. "When would be a good time to pick me up?" He hesitated. "Jenna and I are both tied up this week. Would you mind coming by bus?" I held the phone and smiled anyway. The details didn't matter. Ben missed me. That was the point. That night I tossed and turned in bed like a kid about to take a big trip. The next morning I carefully packed the pencil case I'd sewn for Ben, stitched with his initials on the bottom. As the bus pulled into their neighborhood I spotted Jenna's house immediately. I was nervous as I stood at the front door. I took a deep breath, then rang the bell with a practiced smile. Jenna opened the door. Her expression was flat. "Margaret, you're here." I smiled and nodded, lifting my bag as I stepped inside. The house was oddly quiet. No, Ben and David hadn't come downstairs. "Ben's at a friend's. He won't be back until tonight," she said as she led me into the kitchen. "I've got a bunch of meetings this week and David's busy too, so if you could keep an eye on the place that'd be great. Just make something simple for dinner." She said it all so casually, like we'd agreed on this in advance. I didn't argue. Just said, "Sure, I'll make something nice tonight." From that day on, it felt like I'd been dropped straight back into my life from 30 years ago. Laundry. Ironing shirts. Cooking. Cleaning. Day after day. I couldn't even remember if I was still here to see my grandson, because Ben was hardly around, off at tutoring or playing with friends. Me. I didn't even have a room. That first night I assumed the guest room just wasn't ready yet. But when I saw the fold-out cot and a thin blanket laid out near the staircase I understood. I was sleeping in the living room. I didn't say anything. But that night, lying on the cot, my back ached so badly I could barely turn over. The next morning I got up early and made pancakes, cooked oatmeal, even found some fresh fruit in Jenna's fridge and arranged it nicely on a plate. Jenna took a bite and said, "Oh, this is better than I expected." David didn't look up from his phone. Just muttered, "Thanks, Mom." That night Ben came home late, said he had tutoring. I just finished bathing him and we were curled up on the couch. I was telling him stories from when he was little. He leaned against me, giggling, and my heart filled with something warm and soft. But before I could finish the story, Jenna's voice came drifting down the stairs. "It's late. He has tutoring tomorrow." I stopped, gently patting Ben's back. "We'll finish tomorrow." He pouted all the way upstairs. I picked up the towel and cup, tidied up the living room, and sat back down on the fold-out bed, only to hear the low, unmistakable voices coming from upstairs. "She should be leaving soon, right?" "Maybe in a couple of days," David replied. "I still have a few meetings. My room's a mess and I have to clear space for her. It's really inconvenient." David didn't say anything. Just silence. I looked down at my hands. My fingers still carried the memory of the pencil case I'd sewn for Ben. I pulled it from my bag and placed it on my lap. Each tiny stitch had been sewn late at night, with tired hands and hopeful thoughts. And then it hit me. Ben hadn't really missed me. He'd been the excuse. I was here to fill a gap. To be the person they just happened to need. That night I didn't brush my teeth. Didn't wash my face. I sat on the couch, wrapped in that thin blanket, unmoving. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Soft, steady, like a slow leak in a life I was no longer living. At 5 in the morning I woke up. My hair was a mess, my back stiff as a board. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't check the kitchen's little whiteboard schedule. I packed my things into my travel bag, folded the blanket neatly and set it aside. Jenna was still asleep. David came down the stairs and stopped when he saw me standing by the door, bag on my back. He blinked, confused. I looked him straight in the eye and said calmly, "I won't be a burden anymore. I know the way." He opened his mouth, maybe to say something. But I didn't wait. I opened the door myself. Closed it behind me. Walked out without looking back. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. The ground was cold beneath my feet, and the street was so quiet not even the birds had started singing. I carried my bag and I know my figure must have looked small, maybe even fragile, but every step I took was firmer than the last. I wasn't running away. I was making a statement. To them. To myself. I'm not your backup plan. And I'm not coming back. The day I left David's house, I had no destination in mind. I just knew I couldn't go back to the nursing home. And I couldn't return to that house where I was only welcome in theory. With my sewing kit and a change of clothes, I walked into the bus station. "Where to?" the ticket agent asked. I glanced up at the map. The names were a blur. None of them meant home. I picked one that sounded soft. Roseville. It was a small place, cheap ticket, not too far. A few hours later, I found myself in the center of Roseville, checking into an old roadside motel. The room wasn't clean. The sheets had coffee stains that wouldn't come out, the ceiling fan buzzed like a tired wasp, but there was a door I could lock and a window I could see the sky through. That night I slept deeply. Maybe because no one told me I could only stay 2 nights. Maybe because there were no voices upstairs whispering decisions about me. The next morning I bought some fabric and a few zippers. I figured I'd make a few little pouches and try my luck at the local market. I didn't use a credit card. Didn't go online. Didn't book ahead. I didn't know how to navigate all those newfangled tools, but my hands, they still worked just fine. I sat on a park bench near the motel, sewing in the sunshine. Light filtered through the trees, wind playing with the scraps of cloth in my lap. Everything was quiet. So, around noon, a woman in an orange trench coat approached. She looked to be in her 40s, hair pinned neatly, coffee cup in hand. "You made that?" she asked, nodding at the pouch on my lap. I nodded shyly. "Yes. I stitched it myself." "Wow." She sat down beside me, her smile warm and easy. "You could totally sell these. I have a friend who's a gift shop buyer. He's always looking for that handmade with love kind of thing." I didn't quite understand what a buyer was, but she sounded confident. Pulled out a business card. "Make a couple samples, send them to this address. I'll pass them along, see if they're interested in stocking you." She winked. "Holiday season's coming. You might just be in time." She spoke like she'd been waiting for someone just like me, an old lady with crafty hands and a quaint backstory. I was moved. It had been so long since anyone looked at something I made and said it was worth something, that it was in season. I felt like a toddler stepping into someone else's coloring book, hoping not to ruin the picture. That night, back in the motel, I stitched 2 pouches, one red, one green, carefully embroidered with little flowers and buttons. Not a single corner left rough. I bought bubble wrap with my own money, paid for shipping and sent them to the address on her card. When I dropped the package into the mailbox, I felt giddy, like someone had wound me up again. She said she'd call in 3 days. The first day I didn't leave my room. Ordered breakfast delivery so I wouldn't miss the call. The second day doubt crept in. I checked the number on her card. Doubt. This number is no longer in service. I went to the post office to track the delivery. The clerk frowned at the address. "That place hasn't been occupied since last year," he said. "No one's signed for anything there in months." And just like that, my legs gave out beneath me. I had been scammed. But it wasn't the money. It was the tiny spark of hope I'd let myself believe in. That someone saw me. that someone wanted what I could still offer. I went back to the motel in silence. Sat on the edge of the bed and called David. He picked up quickly. Mom? Where are you? The home said you never checked back in. My voice shook. David, I didn't want to stay there anymore. I just wanted to try living on my own. But I got scammed. I just wanted to be independent. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, call the home, Mom. I'm not in town. And he hung up. That's when I knew, no matter where I was, he didn't want to know. The motel's air conditioner hummed like it was laughing at me, mocking this little rebellion of mine. I stared at the sewing kit that had fallen to the floor and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I realized, I'm still just an old woman. No retirement cushion. No tech savvy. No one waiting for me to come home. I hadn't escaped. I'd simply wandered from one place I didn't belong, into another that didn't want me either. This was my freedom. That evening I found myself back on the same old bench, stitching together the last of my fabric scraps. It was colder than the day before, wind tugging at the loose threads, my fingers too stiff to obey, but I stayed seated. I didn't know if I was waiting for someone, or if I just wasn't ready to give up and go back. I looked up and saw someone settle onto the bench across from me. She wore a worn leather jacket and a red scarf, her silver-gray hair wild but with a kind of intention. She set a hot cup of coffee on the armrest and gave me a side glance. Those are nice stitches, she said, voice bright and gravelly, like it had stories packed inside. I said nothing. Just kept sewing. She didn't leave. Didn't push conversation. She just sat there, like a tree or a street-smart alley cat that knew when to speak and when to stay still. 5 minutes later she stood up, walked over and placed the coffee beside me. You coming back tomorrow? I nodded. He grinned. I'll bring some scraps. Let's see who stitches faster. Then she walked away. I watched her go, and for the first time in a long while I felt, not quite hopeful, but not hopeless either. Maybe I just hadn't quit yet. The next morning I returned to the bench. The sun was gentler than the day before, though the wind was sharper. I brought my scraps, my thread. I half expected yesterday's silver-haired woman to have been just a passing moment. But she showed up again. Same leather jacket. This time a navy scarf. Still holding a hot cup of coffee. You really came back, she said, smiling. I thought that nod was just polite. I smiled faintly. I don't have anywhere else to be. Well then, we've got something in common. She sat beside me without asking, unzipping her canvas bag to reveal a pile of colorful fabric scraps and a roll of old sewing thread. I'm Joan, she said, tossing a square of fabric onto my lap. You. Maggie. She nodded like she'd just logged it into a long-kept mental ledger, then immediately began threading a needle with steady hands. So we sat, two old women stitching in silence. She didn't ask where I came from. Didn't ask what I was doing here. All she said was, you know what's worse than being ignored when you're old? Being treated like you're already finished. I didn't answer. But her words hit with the precision of a needle to the chest. She went on. I got divorced at 62. Moved out of the house I'd lived in for 30 years. You know what my ex-husband said to me? I shook my head. He said, Joan, what are you doing? You're too old to start over. She laughed as she mimicked him. Like the rest of my years were just meant for sitting and dying quietly. She said it light, but I could hear the fire smoldering underneath. So what did you do? I asked. I moved into my sister's attic, took odd jobs, learned how to quilt, started volunteering at the community center. Now I teach sewing, run programs, hold the spare keys, and fix the coffee machine when it breaks. I couldn't help but laugh. She let out a proud little hum. I might not be anyone's sweetheart, but I know how to do things. And people are glad I'm around. That's enough. I pushed the thread forward through the fabric, feeling something I hadn't in years. I'd forgotten how calming it was to feel cloth take shape in your hands, how satisfying it was to tighten the last stitch. You're not too bad yourself, she said, glancing over. Bet you were good at this once. I used to work in a factory. Textile. I nodded. She whistled. Figures. We stitched and talked. Not idle small talk, but the kind of real conversation only veterans share. Two women trading war stories from a life that doesn't get handed back to you once it's been taken. Suddenly, Joan stopped and pulled out a flyer from her bag. Our community center runs a sewing circle every Tuesday. Just a bunch of old ladies chattering away, but none of them stitch as tight as you. She handed me the paper. At the top in big bold letters it read, Silver Hands Club, because we're not done yet. I stared at that tagline for a long time. You coming? She asked. I hesitated. I'm not great with people. For the social or anything. He waved it off. Who said anything about people? Just come so. Tease free. No one cares where you're from. I looked down at the flyer at the crease where my fingers had warmed the paper. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel invisible. That afternoon I went. The community center was tucked into an old brick building in the historic part of town. A faded flagpole stood at the entrance and a handwritten welcome sign clung to the window like it had been there forever. Inside was small and a little chaotic. Fabric piles stacked on chairs, scissors scattered across tables, sewing machines that looked like they'd been humming since the 60s. Around a few long tables sat 7 or 8 older women, hand-stitching floral patches into neat little squares. The room smelled like laundry detergent and hot tea. Joan clapped me on the back like she was introducing a celebrity. Ladies, this is Maggie, just wait till you see her stitch. I'm not exaggerating. Heads turned. Some nodded. A few smiled. One waved me over. I sat down and for some reason felt a flicker of unease. It had been a long time since someone saved me a seat. Joan dumped a giant bag of mismatched fabric onto the table. All right, today we're making needle pouches. Christmas market's coming. If you've got hands, they better not be idle. I picked up a scrap of cloth, smoothed it out and made my first stitch. The moment my fingers touched the fabric, I knew. I still remembered how to do this. By the end of the session I'd made 4 pouches. The colors weren't striking, but the stitches were tight, the corners crisp. The woman beside me clicked her tongue in admiration. That's factory-level work right there. I smiled, saying little. But inside something lit up. Before we wrapped up, Joan came over and said quietly, "These could sell, you know." I shook my head instinctively. No one wants to buy old lady scraps. She looked at me hard. You realize you're not rejecting the market, you're rejecting yourself. I didn't answer. She didn't push. She just gently gathered my 4 pouches into a bag. I'll hold on to these. If you change your mind, come see me tomorrow. And that's when I realized she didn't just see my work. She saw me. She wasn't pitying me. She was serious. On the walk back to the motel, I held onto the club flyer like it was a rope I didn't quite trust, but couldn't let go. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those women around the sewing tables. About Joan saying, "You're rejecting yourself." And I started to wonder, if I'm not the grandma who's only needed when convenient, if I'm not the burden no one wants to claim, if I'm not someone's problem to solve, then who am I? I didn't have the answer. But for the first time I felt like maybe it wouldn't be no one. The third time I returned to the center, Joan brought someone with her. She blew in like a breeze. Wearing a baseball cap, slinging a camera over her shoulder, a denim jacket covered in shiny pins. Her smile hovered at the corners of her mouth like it wasn't sure whether to show up all the way. "This is my granddaughter Eliza," Joan said, patting her shoulder. "She's studying design, does something with content and media. Swears she had to come meet our silver stitchers." Eliza extended her hand. "Hi, I'm Eliza. Heard you're the legendary stitcher." I chuckled. "Legendary's a stretch. I just stitch in straight lines." She winked. "You'd be surprised what the internet loves." I didn't understand what she meant, so I just kept sewing a little bunny coin purse I was working on. Eliza wandered, snapping photos of fabrics, wrinkled quilts, the women hunched over their work, and eventually me. "Don't take my picture," I waved her off. "I'm not camera material." She smiled. "Every line on your face is more real than any filter." I blinked. Before I could respond, she was gone. After the session she came back around and sat across from me. "You selling these?" she asked. I shook my head. "Just for fun. Gifts mostly." "But what if someone wants to buy them?" I hesitated. "People don't buy things made by old ladies." She pulled out a chair and sat with purpose. "Then let's make them want to." I stared at her. "I don't follow." "Let's open a little online shop. You make, I promote. We'll call it Granny's Hands." I laughed. "Come again." "Granny's Hands," she repeated, dead serious. "Every stitch tells a story. It's my senior project, but it could be your fresh start. Something old inside me shifted. A place I thought had gone quiet for good. I don't know anything about the internet, I said. That's fine. I do. Just so. I'll sell it. I hesitated. I'd been scammed before. Burned by people who smiled too easily. She saw it in my eyes. So she leaned in and said low and steady. You don't owe anyone your trust. But you do deserve to be seen. Over the next few days I stitched 10 more pouches. Eliza photographed each one, shot close-ups of my hands at work, and even filmed a little video of me threading needles and tightening corners, all set to light, cheerful music. You want to say something for the video? She asked. I shook my head. No need. I stitched. Let the thread do the talking. We launched the shop together, naming the first collection, Granny's Hands, Stitched with Soul. I fully expected the listings to sit untouched for months, years even. Instead, 3 days later, Eliza sent me a video. She'd secretly filmed me sewing, edited it with soft music and simple subtitles. My grandma doesn't know she's cool. But I do. I sat on my motel bed watching the screen, watching her. That old woman in the faded sweater, quietly drawing needle through fabric, eyes steady, fingers sure, her face soft and focused. It was me. But I didn't recognize myself at first. Then the comments started rolling in. I would buy anything she makes. Finally, something made by a person, not a machine. Her hands look like my grandma's. I miss her so much. Where can I buy? Eliza texted. Maggie, we're blowing up. We need to ramp up production. I stared at the message for a full minute before replying. Is this really happening? She answered. Told you it would. So I worked. By day I stitched at the community center. By night I sat on the motel bed, a lamp clipped to the headboard, fingers flying. Eliza's friend designed custom tags for us. Simple craft paper, each one pinned to a pouch stamped with handmade by Maggie, with care, not clock. I insisted every pouch include a handwritten card. Not big thoughts. Just little pieces of life. Yesterday's weather was beautiful. Poked my finger today, but I'm still smiling. Drank tea with a friend. Felt like spring. People started posting the cards online, saying they reminded them of home. Of someone they'd lost. Of someone they missed. They didn't just need my pouches. They liked me. For the first time I wasn't useful. I was loved. I took that very first Granny's Hands card and tucked it deep into the bottom of my box. When all this settles down, I'll have it framed. And hang it in a place that's finally, truly mine. Just as my little business was finding its rhythm. Orders coming in, messages of thanks from strangers, purpose stitched into every pouch. I got a call from David. Mom, he began hesitantly. His voice carried the weight of rehearsed concern. We need to talk about something. I could already hear it coming. There've been layoffs at work. Things are tight. Then a pause. Do you still have some savings? My stomach dropped. But my voice stayed level. What kind of trouble are you in? He sighed. Jenna and I have been talking. We might have to sell the house. That savings you've got, we were thinking maybe we could use part of it. To pay off some debt. Keep things afloat. And just like that it all clicked. That word, difficulties, wasn't just about his job. It was about their house. Their choices. And the role they expected me to play. He kept going softer now. I know, we haven't always been good to you. But you've helped us so much before. Watching Ben, keeping things going. We could really use your help. One more time. Help. That word hit me like a stone to the chest. Because this wasn't about help. This was about expectation. About convenience. About assuming I was still the same woman who would give everything without asking for anything in return. I took a breath. David, I said quietly. What you need isn't help. What you need is to face reality. Silence. The kind that stretches out long enough to hear your own breath. I continued, steady as a thread. I'll think about whether I want to help. And how much. But you should know, I've become your backup plan. And I no longer want to live like one. Then I hung up. My heart was racing. I knew this was only the beginning. The start of a boundary I should have drawn a long time ago. In the days that followed, I noticed myself hardening, especially around them. David and Jenna still came to me with that same thinly veiled tone of need. But now I could see it for what it was. A pattern. A dependency. a burden I'd been carrying long after it stopped being mine. One night, I sat on the edge of my bed reviewing a list of customer orders. Red marks where I needed to restock supplies. Names of people who valued my work. I was planning a way to tell David and Jenna face to face that I wasn't going to be their lifeline anymore. And then the phone rang. Jenna. "Hi, Maggie," she said, her voice gentler than usual, like she already knew I was drawing a line. "I know we're asking a lot. David's looking into loans, but we thought, maybe you could help? Just a little." I held the phone to my ear, silent. "You've always been careful with money," she went on. "We wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. You wouldn't need to give much. Just enough to help us through this rough patch." I took a deep breath and slowly lowered the phone. Sat there in silence. Not angry. Just exhausted. But suddenly it hit me. All my years of giving had never been seen as gifts. Only as obligation. It wasn't their fault, not really. It was mine. I had taught them to rely on me. To expect me. "I'm not angry," I whispered to myself. "But I should have stopped this a long time ago." And I hung up. When the phone rang again, I didn't answer. Because this time the line had been drawn. They would have to learn to stand on their own. Without reaching for the woman who had finally remembered how to hold the thread of her own life. A few days later, David and Jenna showed up. I watched them walk through the door, expressionless, quiet. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Jenna looked at me cautiously, her voice tentative. "Maggie, we really don't have any other options. We're so sorry." David kept his eyes down. "Yeah, we know you've done so much for us." But something inside me had shifted. For the first time in years, I felt steady, unmoved, and no longer carrying the weight of guilt disguised as love. "You shouldn't treat me like a solution to your problems," I said calmly. "If you keep asking me to take on your responsibilities, that's not help, that's theft. You're not asking for support. You're asking me to give up my life again." David looked stunned. Like he'd just been hit with something he didn't know he'd been carrying. He tried again, voice softer now. "Can you help us just one more time?" "I can help," I said after a pause. "But this time it won't be as your safety net. This is your reality now. You need to learn to face it." I saw something shift in David's face. Something small but real. A bit of understanding maybe. Or regret. Jenna stayed quiet, her expression unreadable. But she looked at me a little longer than she used to. Not dismissively. Not pitying. Just seeing. "Understood," David said finally. I nodded, rising to my feet. "I'll make you something to eat." They sat quietly at my table, finished their meal in silence, then left without a fuss. I stood by the window watching them go. And as I watched David's shoulders disappear down the walkway, I knew he'd heard me. Maybe not fully. Maybe not yet. But something had landed. A few days later, he showed up at the community center. I was packing a fresh batch of pouches when I noticed him through the glass doors, hovering awkwardly, looking more worn than I'd ever seen him. The look in his eyes, it wasn't just tired. It was the look of someone who finally realized they'd lost something precious, and didn't know if they could ever get it back. I walked out. He opened his mouth. "Mom." I wanted to talk. I didn't turn him away. Instead, I led him to a small garden off to the side. Just a few dusty benches and a tree that rarely bloomed. He didn't waste time. "I'll be